Today, I'm going to answer the question that I get asked all the time. Is serviced accommodation a good investment? So you're probably watching this video because you've heard about serviced accommodation. Maybe you haven't got the money to buy a buy-to-let property yourself, or you could have a buy-to-let property and you're just looking into whether or not you should convert it to a serviced accommodation property to get a higher cash flow. Now, we've got to pre-frame this with a few other points as well, because you don't always get a higher cash flow. That's one thing that I discovered when I converted some of my buy-to-let properties over. That I found that in most cases you did get a higher cash flow, but then there's certain variables which made one of them not get a higher cash flow. So I'll go into that in a little bit. But firstly, let's talk about cash flow, because I'm the cash flow king. Everything I do is about cash flow. That's why I run the Property Cash Flow Academy. It's all about the cash flow. The capital growth as well is very important, but with most of these strategies, you're only going to be focusing on the cash flow, because this is what's the most important. Cash flow is king. Now, if we compare a buy-to-let property, like renting a house to a family, versus a serviced accommodation where you're renting this property to guests, businesses, leisure travelers, it can be so varied. Which makes the most money? Well, generally, the serviced accommodation will make at least double what the buy-to-let property will make. That's general. Now, there's a lot of variables to this, as I mentioned. It depends where you are. So if you're in a city and there is an undersupply of hotel accommodation, or the hotels are very poor condition, you can take my city, Coventry, where I invest quite heavily. That has always been renowned for having a very low grade of accommodation in terms of hotels. And that's why serviced accommodation has been so popular in this city. And for a property like something that I own, I could rent it, well, let's just say this, a typical property near to the city centre that might be 2 bedrooms, as at today, 2019, 2020, that will rent for somewhere in the region of £600, £650 as a 2-bed single let. Now, for me, I would rent that property that I own for about £1,000, because obviously I want to get a lot more. I've got a lot more experience. So I would improve the standard of that accommodation so that it rents a lot easier and for a lot more money. It's going to be very hard to compete with it for other houses in the area because it's such a nice property. So with that said, say 600, 650, but I'm getting 1,000. That same property, when I converted it to a serviced accommodation house, so remember it's 2 bedrooms, so you got the master bedroom with a double, the second bedroom with 2 singles, and then you've got the downstairs lounge that has the sofa bed in it, so that can sleep up to 6 people. That same property that I could get, say, £1,000 for, will rent for an average of £1,500 to £1,600 per month as a serviced accommodation unit. So the cash flow is a lot higher. Now, let's take that same example and let's move it to a holiday destination, let's say. Well, you might get a property that rents for, say, £2,000 per month as a family home. That same property as a serviced accommodation can make as much as £6,000 per month in peak season. So it really does vary in terms of the cash flow, but in general, okay, I'm going to add the caveat here that not in all cases, but in general, you can make as much as 3 times the amount, but usually about 50% more as a serviced accommodation unit over a rental property. So the cash flow is absolutely huge. The second thing I'm going to come on to is the ROI, also known as the cap rate in the USA. So the ROI is your return on investment. So what makes the best return? Buy-to-let, single-let, or a serviced accommodation unit? Well, as I've just said in point 1, it really is the serviced accommodation unit. You can get incredible returns, sometimes as much as 20, 25. I've even known 30% return on investment per year. And again, there's so many different ways we can work out ROI, but I'm just talking as a general, not say cash on cash invested, but general return on investment of the value of the property. You can get as much as 25, sometimes even 30% back per year. So it's absolutely huge, whether you own it or whether you're doing a rent to rent on that property. So you're renting it in partnership with a landlord and then renting it via Airbnb, Booking.com, Hotels.com, all the other platforms. You can make some really, really incredible returns on it. Now, if you are going to make your property a serviced accommodation unit as opposed to a buy-to-let property, there's one thing I'd highly recommend, and that is to spend the extra money. So let's say you're going to spend $3,000 renovating it, doing it up. Well, you may as well spend the extra $2,000 getting it to say $5,000, because that extra $2,000 might not seem like it would make a big difference, but it makes a huge difference in terms of your competitiveness in the area. Because you will have competition in serviced accommodation, you always do. And some people will have their houses very nicely decorated, nicely painted, nicely dressed with beautiful furnishings and furniture. You've got to make sure that your property is the same. In fact, not just the same, but better. Look at the competition and say, how can I make my property the best in the market? What can I do to make sure I get all 5-star reviews with my guests and get lots of them? How can I get lots and lots of reviews? Now, one of the first mistakes that I made when I started getting into serviced accommodation was that because my property was so good and so beautiful, I would lower the price. That's not the mistake. The mistake I made was renting it long term. So the first person said, I want to book it for a month long. And I said, oh, great, I've got it booked for a month. Okay, and I rented it for a month. The person after that, I want to book it for 2 months, a different person. And I said, oh, okay, it's a toss-up now. Do I take the money or do I get the reviews? So I said, okay, well, I can kick the can down the road, as it were. So I took the 2-month one. So by the time, 3 months has gone by, I've only got 2 reviews. See, this was a problem. So what I should have done, and I'd recommend to you to do, is only let people book it for, say, a couple of nights or a few nights at a time. Only take those short stays, because that's how you're going to build up your reviews really, really fast. And once you've got lots of reviews, you're going to go up the ranking on Airbnb, on Booking.com, and all the other platforms, because the algorithm will see your property as more valuable, see that a lot of people are engaging with it. The booking rate versus the viewing rate is very high as well. So that would be my top tip. Don't rent long-term straight away. Do that a little bit later. Maybe get 5, 6, 10 reviews and then start doing the long-term bookings. It will be a lot more effective for you in the long run. Your other competitors are, as I alluded to, a hotel or a bed and breakfast. Now, some cities are also having serviced accommodation apartment blocks coming into the city, and a lot of hotels are now just starting to jump on this bandwagon, whereas before they didn't really bother. Because the thing with hotels is, as long as they're at 75% occupancy rate, they really don't mind. They're not, they don't care if they do get to 100%. I mean, yes, it's good for their profitability, but in most cases, as long as they've got 75% occupancy, they've covered their bases and they've got a profit. So that's what most of them will be focused on. A B&B, for example, will be very different. They want 100% occupancy. They're going to be a lot more aggressive in their marketing and their strategy, maybe even offering discounts and things like that, and extras such as the breakfast thrown in for free and all sorts of other things, because they want to be at 95 to 100% occupancy, because they're usually, say, a couple or it's a person running it on their own. So they've really got to hustle to make sure that they make a good profit on that, and they're fully booked all the time, because it is a hustle versus a hotel that's owned by corporate, so it'll be shareholders, and it's not the same dynamic there. So when you are competing with a hotel or a bed and breakfast, the thing that will stand you out, shall we say, with your serviced accommodation over them is that most of the people that book you will be booking you for one reason and one reason only. And that's because they want a home away from home. It's not usually about the price, although yes, it is cheaper long term to rent a serviced accommodation over a hotel, but it's really the fact that it's a home away from home. They don't want to have someone knocking on their door. They don't want to have people making noise down the corridor. They don't want a party above them or below them. They just want a house or a flat or an apartment, whatever it is, that's away from the noise, from the hustle and bustle, but it's still quite central to where they need to go to. And they can cook there, they can live there, they can relax there. So this is what you need to aim your property at, this target market. The next point that I think is a huge benefit for serviced accommodation over other forms of rental like buy-to-let, single-let, etc., is that it's very, very low risk. And what I mean by that is, if you have a property and you've got tenants in that property and they don't pay you, or they trash the place, or they abscond, or whatever else, or let's say the worst case is they're not paying you and they're staying there and you've got to get them evicted. That is a very long process, and you would do that under Section 21 or Section 8 notice, one of these sort of eviction policies. It takes a long time. You have to go through the courts. You then have to get bailiffs and do all this other stuff. I've never had to do it for myself personally, but I've done it for quite a lot of my landlords in the past to help them out, or if they wanted to give the property to me afterwards as management. And it is a long process. It's very difficult, and it's very stressful as well. Now, here's the great thing with serviced accommodation. You don't have to worry about any of that. The reason you don't have to worry about that is because serviced accommodation doesn't have tenants. It has guests. Now, the great thing about a guest is that a guest doesn't have the same rights as a tenant. So you could quite literally, if you found out someone was misbehaving or whatever in your serviced accommodation, you can quite literally go to that house or that apartment and knock on the door and say, "Thank you, Mr. Guest, or Mrs. Guest, but you need to leave. You know, I don't want you in this property anymore. You need to leave." If they don't leave, you can call the police and ask them to be removed, because they don't have those rights of tenure like a tenant has. You can ask them to leave at any time. And that's the great thing, especially if they breach your terms and conditions. They have absolutely zero rights. You know, they have even less rights than before if they have a party or anything like that. And that really is the main risk with a serviced accommodation. It's having a party in there or trashing your serviced accommodation. But that's what the deposit's for that you take. And also, another top tip, if you haven't watched my video on how to stop parties at your serviced accommodation, that's on the channel. Go and check that out. But that will show you how to make sure you never have a party. So really that risk, I've mitigated that for you as well. So I personally see serviced accommodation as way less risk than buy-to-let, and it's a lot more profit. So this is why my business model is focused very heavily on serviced accommodation, as well as rent-to-rent and HMOs and deal packaging and all the other things that you guys know that I do by now. But the main point for me, and this is the biggest point that I think like overshadows everything else, is that serviced accommodation is amazing fun. It really is. I just love doing serviced accommodation. I love going to speak to our guests and finding out about them. I love speaking to the companies, to leisure travelers, whoever it is. I like to meet these people, because the more of them I meet, the more I find out about people, and the more I find out about guests and my potential guests for the future. I like to ask, was there anything, say, at the property that was missing? You know, was there something missing from the property that you wish you had? You know, would it have made your experience better? What could I have done to make sure this experience was way better for next time or the next guest? You know, I love asking these questions, but overall serviced accommodation is so much fun, and you don't need to worry like you do with, say, buy-to-let properties, which, by the way, if you haven't watched any of my other videos on why I never buy buy-to-let properties anymore, go and check that out, because it will show you about all these new tax laws which are just decimating the industry. So there's a lot of other things you can do, such as limited company structures and all that, but that's really outside the scope of this video. I'd love to teach you about all of that on one of my trainings or my property cash flow live event or something like that. I'd love to see you in the future. So I really do hope that all of this advice helped and that we can meet one day in the near future. Hey, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. You also want to click the link in the top of the description, which is going to take you to the propertycashflowacademy.com. You're also going to want to follow me on my social channels so you're kept up to date. Apart from that, I'll see you on the next video.